The Dark Souls Remastered network test may be over, but with extensive footage in hand, we now have our first look at how the game translates to all PlayStation 4 and Xbox One systems. Now we've already had a sizable chunk of PS4 Pro preview footage to look at, running at a native 1800p and near faultlessly at 60fps from the start up to the Taurus Demon. It so far comes across as a conservative but satisfying remaster effort. What this network test finally gives us then is a sense of perspective. How does Xbox One X, a more powerful machine on paper, actually take strides over the Pro version? And equally, where does that leave the two base consoles in the delivery of the game? One point before I dive in, this really is an early and unique build just to test the PvP invasions in a restricted segment of Lordran. Even though the client weighs in at 3GB, almost the size of the full game, we're blocked off from a lot of the best bits. No trips to that wyvern on the bridge or access to Sen's Fortress, for example. All those are hidden by impassable fog doors or untouchable levers for now. And by extension that means no Blighttown testing today, and so the big question still dangles as to whether that area will ultimately run well or not. Instead we have a custom tailored build to show off the Undead Parish area, leading up to the two bell gargoyles on the rooftop. It even cuts off the red wyvern behind this gate. Again, I would have been fascinated to see how frame rates hold up there. The point is, in the hands of an inexperienced player, you could rattle through the whole thing in 5 minutes. Short as it is, the fortunate bit is it still gives a snapshot of how all four platforms are shaping up. And as a network test, it also shows the remaster ticking some big boxes. I struggled to summon Solaire a couple of times, but in terms of the online invasion mechanic, it doesn't seem like there's much for me to complain about. It all clicks together, and for the online play at least, it's in a good place ahead of that May 25th launch. The footage being rolled out here so far is on Xbox One X. It's easily the best console version, but to my surprise, it's not blowing the doors off the hinges by comparison to PS4 Pro. What you get is a native 3200 by 1800 image, just the same as Sony's enhanced machine, and visually speaking the feature set is identical. Textures, effects, ambient occlusion quality and motion blur are exactly like for like between the two. The upside is Xbox One X doesn't miss a beat in performance, which I'll cover a bit later, but really the initial reaction to this is 1800p really all X owners get? Being a last gen game at heart, a full 4K should have been the big advantage on Microsoft's machine. It's the progression we get in games like Resident Evil 7 for example, another case with an 1800p frame buffer on Pro and with a push to 2160p on X. And while the upscale here is as ever decent from that resolution, I can't help but feel an opportunity is being missed. Again, this is a special build designed for testing network play, but if this stands for the full release, the sense is this is a setting made out of convenience rather than to cater to each system's power profile. All that stands out even more when you consider the base consoles. Let's put all four in a big side by side. A standard Xbox One runs at a plain and simple 1920 by 1080. There's symmetry on this end of the spectrum, since a regular PS4 model also renders at a native 1080p with no visual contrasts either side. The difference here is, neither machine can functionally push past a 1080p output anyway to distinguish itself from the other. Given the base Xbox One does actually perform pretty well at 1080p 60 based on this test, with drops I'll touch on in a second, it doesn't leave the PS4 version much scope for improvement visually. Unlike Xbox One X, where there is room to expand next to PS4 Pro, the base PS4 is already maxing out its options. That's the lowdown on resolution then, but what do the enhanced consoles get overall? Past the 1800p upgrade, sadly these machines are pushing identical settings to the base models. It's the first time we've had a proper close-up with all four, but it's again a sign X and Pro are really only getting a res boost. In my view, it doesn't do the presentation much harm though. Surprisingly, these aging textures do hold up quite nicely on a 4K TV. And combined with the refreshed alpha work for bloodstains, smoke and fire, the walk through this initial courtyard still looks crisp. The only exception is the rather messy haze transparency effect that kicks in when activating a bonfire. It doesn't hold up well this close, but the rest gets the job done beautifully. There is one catch for PS4 Pro and Xbox One X, a small discrepancy. It may be a glitch, but consistently I found no hint of the lens flare effect in any matching shots on either enhanced machine. Meanwhile, the two base consoles most certainly have it. all through the initial cutscene with the first gargoyle. It flickers from the top right corner on a regular Xbox One for example, but never materializes on X, even once you get to gameplay. It's odd, and the obvious suspicion is it has something to do with running at a higher 1800p resolution, causing a conflict with the way that effect renders. In the same vein, Bloom is running at a higher resolution on X and Pro, which gives it a more precise blend around objects. Meanwhile, as you can see here, lighting on the base consoles bleeds over the edges of the gargoyle's axe in a more exaggerated way. This in practice is the only differential, but honestly I was hard pressed to notice the change in action. That absent lens flare though, if it stands in the final game, will need some attention. As it goes, the base machines are getting a neat visual extra. That's the visual side of things. Even back in 2011 on PS3 and 360, Dark Souls was slightly undervalued at the time for its graphics. From the shader work to its world complexity, the game represented a huge leap over Demon Souls before it. Of course, all of that ambition came at a serious cost to performance, notoriously landing single-digit numbers in some areas. And so it's a relief to finally get this game in full flow at 60Hz on console. And while we don't have the absolute extreme stress test here, there's a few telling signs of how things will pan out. First off, Xbox One X. It's basically flawless. Try as I might, I couldn't get a single frame drop in the Undead Parish areas, as limited as they are. Whether that's facing a burst of particles from a downed armoured boar, luring multiple enemies into the church, or filling the screen with fire from the gargoyles, it runs without a hitch. This is conceivably the payoff for having parity with PS4 Pro everywhere else. Though the GPU power on X is wasted to an extent, since it runs at 60fps mostly on all formats anyway, but the fact is you do get that extra stability on X. From what I'm seeing, it stands the best chance of getting you from A to B with the fewest drops, if any, and that should apply to Blighttown when we get to it. PS4 Pro meanwhile follows the same lock at 60fps. The network test here really doesn't flag any major drops at all, but in my earlier preview build analysis, there were very occasional brief lurches to the low 50s. It's nothing to detract from the game's playability in the Undead Parish then, which in my playthrough ran flawlessly, but simply the preview build drop does make you wonder if there could be a performance gap next to X in the stress test areas. The new Londo Ruins being another spot that gave last gen machines big trouble. We'll have to see. The regular PS4 and Xbox One are possibly where we could see more trouble down the road. These are the two worst performers so far, but really only in isolated spots with lots of alpha. Taking Xbox One as an example, you get drops to the low 50s with tearing right at the top, an adaptive VSync solution that renders incomplete frames if it falls out of the render time budget. Now most of the time it's a 60fps line just like the other versions, but it is the most prone to drops when faced with that particle explosion or fire effects. In isolation, this Undead Parish area is all I've seen of this machine's performance, and it's more than reasonable. All it does right now is put a question mark over how later more testing areas will run. For perspective, a base PS4 suffers even fewer drops, though they do happen in similar conditions. Just like the Pro model, there is also a permanently enforced VSync here, which means no tearing at all when it does. From that, you can reasonably deduce an Xbox One X will have screen tear just like its base equivalent, but since we've yet to see any actual drop, it's not fully confirmed. Really, as a snapshot of one of the game's less demanding spots, it still shows that pecking order. Looking ahead, the fortunes of the Dark Souls Remaster are mixed. Yes, it's disappointing on the one hand to not get much more on Xbox One X visually, but there is value to potentially having the smoothest release. Otherwise, all 4 console versions run at 60fps for 99% of the playthrough, only punctuated by brief moments that show any real weakness. It's as you'd hope for a last gen game running on modern systems, even Xbox One, but we'll just have to see how the full game stacks up. Anyway, that's all from me. If you did find this video useful in any way, do let me know with a like or subscribe, and be sure to allow notifications to know when each new video is uploaded. Otherwise, the 4K source file here is on our Patreon at digitalfoundry.net, and to get in touch directly, you can find me and the team on Twitter. But until next time, thanks for watching.